Hi, folks. This is Don Meisner with the North Country Fishing Report. You know, I've talked an awful lot about how the strike is the most important thing to me in the fishing experience. There's so many parts of it, and it's different for everybody. Tournament fishermen, the strike is just the beginning. The most important thing to them is to have that fish in as quickly as they can, not have it escape, and to be able to weigh it and maybe make some money. For me, everything builds up to that suddenness of a strike. And that's what fishing is. That's what it all boils down to. After that, yes, it's great fun to feel the battle and to watch what it does. But if I lose it, as long as I see the fish and I've felt that impact of the strike, that's everything to me. But I want you to realize that every fish, every species of fish, strikes in a somewhat different manner, depending on what the design of their body is, how they go through life, whether they're a predator fish that hides in the weeds like a northern pike and rushes out to get their fish, they're hiding, or whether they're a chase fish. A lot of that can make a difference, and also the power of that fish. But a northern pike will strike so different than a largemouth bass. The two are found in the same type of waters. So a lot of times when you go out, you could catch one or the other on the same baits that you're using. But a northern strike is most of the time far more violent. You feel it and you know immediately after the strike that fish is a northern pike. A largemouth bass with their great big mouth, they'll come up and they'll open that mouth and close it and such, and it causes a suction. And the fish in the bait or whatever they're feeding on will be sucked in immediately. And that feeling is completely different. I don't want to say it's subtle. It stops, everything stops, but it's not that violent, almost high-pitched strike. And talking about it in sound, that's not really what I mean, but I can relate it to that. A northern pike strikes sharper than a largemouth bass. And a smallmouth is going to a strike completely different as well. Well, here's the other thing. Some fish will dash out and strike without even hardly thinking about it, and a lot of times they'll miss the bait. And so with a northern pike, you might feel a strike, and you'll say, there was one, and yet you missed it. It didn't get. And then maybe 10 feet later, there it is again. Well, what's happening is that fish is following and repeatedly trying to decide, do they want it? When you feel that strike, are they nipping at it to see what it feels like, to what it tastes like? There's so many variables that come into it. But if the strike comes to mean everything to you, like it does to me, you'll soon discover exactly the different feels of each of those strikes. And you'll know the fish that you've hooked before you even see it. You'll know, okay, I've got a bass this time. It struck differently. It feels differently. And let me tell you another thing along this, because trout tend to follow and nip. And my whole life's experience was greater with trout in my early life than any other species. And you could be trolling or you could be casting and you could feel a nip, a little tap. It's just a little tap. That could be a great big fish doing it, but they're coming up behind and I think they're tasting it as they follow. And then it'll tap again, and it'll tap again. And a lot of times, trout will follow a huge distance. They'll follow that bait to see whether they want it or not. Northern pike will do the same thing. And my buddy Dave Swanson has been fishing Cayuga Lake for lake trout, and he's discovering so much. But he told me a little instance that happened this week, and I thought it was so important to tell all of you about it. He was fishing with a friend, and what they do is they allow their jig to go all the way down to the bottom, say 60, 70, 80 feet down. And that's where the lake trout tend to be, someplace down there in those deeper depths. And then what you do once it hits the bottom, you reel it straight up. The advantage Dave has had is with the graphs, he can watch his lure coming up and he can watch the fish. Well, he was fishing with a friend who had grown up and lived jigging like I have. And so he was doing the same thing, but Dave said he kept jigging the bait. And Dave says if he jigs it, those fish won't follow it. It goes against everything that I've believed, but it is the truth. It's what happens with them. You have to reel it just straight up. Don't change the speed. And those fish, Dave says, a lot of times you'll feel them hit and hit, and you can watch it, and they're coming up and they're hitting it, but they're not really getting it. And it's interesting. As soon as you feel that, and if you yank and you start reeling real fast, they'll go back down. You have to continue the same speed. They'll keep following. And eventually, if they want it, they'll hit it so hard, you don't even have to set the hook, he said. They'll usually hook themselves. So, my story today is about the strike, the impact of what it is for me as a fisherman, the impact it is on the fish, and how it will determine how deeply they take the bait or don't take it. And it will determine what you feel as you go along and how you can learn exactly what fish you've just hooked without even seeing it, just by how it strikes. Until next time, folks, this is Don Meisner with the North Country Fishing Report.